What I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about Marie Antoinette's death, because the guillotine, that wasn't the real punishment. The real torture happened in the 76 days before that blade ever fell. And it began with an 8-year-old child. This is the story of how the French Revolution destroyed a woman not through violence, but through something far more sinister. They found her breaking point, and they pressed on it until there was nothing left. This is what really happened to Marie Antoinette. Picture this: Paris, July 3rd, 1793. It's past midnight. Inside the Temple prison, silence hangs heavy in the darkness. Marie Antoinette lies beside her young son, Louis Charles. He's only 8 years old. Her hand rests protectively over his small frame since his father's execution. 6 months earlier, she hasn't allowed him to sleep alone, not once. Then the silence shatters. Footsteps, heavy, determined, climbing the tower stairs, growing louder with each second. The door crashes open violently. 6 revolutionary guards burst into the room, waving an official document. They've received orders from the Committee of Public Safety. They're here to take the boy away from his mother. What unfolds over the next 60 minutes is something that witnesses would never forget. This isn't about a queen losing her composure. This is about a mother transformed by desperation, fighting with every fiber of her being to protect her child. She physically blocks the entrance with her body. Her voice tears through the prison walls in screams that last until her throat gives out. She drops to her knees and begs them to execute her instead, to spare her son. But here's the crucial detail that makes this moment so chilling. This wasn't a random act of revolutionary justice. This wasn't about protecting France from a child. This was deliberate, strategic, calculated psychological warfare. The revolutionaries had been studying Marie Antoinette for months. They'd learned something critical. Traditional torture wouldn't break her. Starvation wouldn't break her. Public humiliation wouldn't break her. But her love for her children? That was the weapon they needed. And they were about to use that love to dismantle her completely, piece by piece, in ways that would make her final execution almost irrelevant. But before we go deeper into what they did to her, you need to understand who this woman actually was. Because the Marie Antoinette who suffered in 1793 bore no resemblance to the villain the revolutionaries painted. Born Maria Antonia in Vienna in 1755, she was an Austrian archduchess, the youngest daughter of the formidable Empress Maria Theresa. When she turned 14, she became a political bargaining chip. France and Austria needed to seal an alliance, and she was the payment. She married Louis XV, the heir to the French throne. But this wasn't a fairy tale romance. It was a transaction. From the moment she arrived in France, the court treated her with contempt. She was Austrian, which made her the enemy in French eyes. She was young, inexperienced, and struggled to navigate the brutal politics of Versailles. The nobles mocked everything about her. Her accent, her fashion choices, her every misstep. Even her husband kept his distance. Their marriage remained unconsummated for 7 long years, a fact that became scandalous gossip throughout Europe. Isolated and lonely, she did what many young people might do in her position. She sought escape in superficial pleasures, elaborate hairstyles that reached absurd heights, expensive gowns, lavish parties at her personal estate, the Petit Trianon. Meanwhile, France was drowning in debt, and the common people were starving. They watched her extravagance and gave her a nickname, Madame Deficit. The famous phrase, "let them eat cake." She never said it. It's pure propaganda. But the truth didn't matter. The narrative had already taken root. When the revolution exploded in 1789, Marie Antoinette became France's perfect scapegoat. She represented everything the revolutionaries despised: foreign influence, feminine power, royal privilege. She wasn't necessarily worse than other royals, but she was an easy target. Here's what matters most. By 1793, Marie Antoinette had fundamentally changed. She wasn't that frivolous girl anymore. She was a mother of 4 who'd already buried her eldest son after watching him waste away from tuberculosis at just 7 years old. She'd witnessed her husband being dragged through the streets to his death. She'd spent months locked in a prison tower with her remaining children, never knowing if they'd live to see another sunrise. She'd already lost her crown, her freedom, Her husband, her homeland, everything that had once defined her existence had been stripped away. But the revolutionaries were about to teach her a horrifying lesson. There was still more they could take. Now let me describe the temple prison for you, because understanding this place is essential to understanding what they did to her. This wasn't some ordinary jail. The temple was a medieval fortress, originally constructed by the Knights Templar centuries earlier. Dark stone walls, perpetual dampness, an atmosphere of oppression that pressed down on everyone inside. After King Louis XVI was guillotined in January 1793, Marie Antoinette remained imprisoned there with her two surviving children, Marie-Thérèse, age 14, and Louis Charles, age 8. Initially, the family stayed together in the tower. Marie Antoinette desperately tried to create some semblance of normalcy for her children. Despite their circumstances, she gave them lessons. She led them in prayers. When night fell and the sounds of angry mobs echoed from the streets below, she held them close and told them everything would somehow be all right. But the guards were always there, watching silently, documenting everything, taking notes, sending reports back to the Committee of Public Safety. The ruthless body now controlling France. And those guards noticed something important. Marie Antoinette could withstand almost anything they threw at her, except threats against her children. That observation changed everything. They began experimenting with psychological tactics. First, they restricted when Marie Antoinette could visit her children's rooms, forcing her to humble herself and beg permission to see her own son and daughter. Then they stationed additional guards directly inside the family's living quarters. These men would sit in corners, watching silently, recording every conversation, every embrace, every tear that fell. The children were forbidden from speaking German, their mother's native tongue. French became mandatory, which meant even their most intimate family moments were monitored and controlled by hostile eyes. The pressure started taking a visible physical toll on Marie Antoinette. Her hair, originally a light brown, began turning completely white due to stress, a genuine medical condition that now bears her name, Marie Antoinette syndrome. She lost her appetite and barely ate. She developed severe internal bleeding that she attempted to hide from her captors' watchful eyes. But she endured it all because she still had her children near her. The revolutionaries understood they needed to remove that final source of strength, which brings us back to July 3, 1793. The night that would define Marie Antoinette's ultimate torment. Let me reconstruct that evening for you in detail, because the historical accounts from people who were actually present are absolutely heartbreaking. Around 10 o'clock in the evening, Marie Antoinette has just settled Louis Charles into bed. He's sleeping in the same chamber with her. She hasn't allowed him out of her sight since watching his father die. Her daughter Marie-Thérèse and her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, occupy nearby rooms. Then the sound begins, boots on stone stairs, multiple men ascending, getting closer. The door explodes inward with brutal force. 6 municipal guards storm inside, led by a man carrying an official decree from the Committee of Public Safety. The order is clear. Louis Charles must be removed immediately. He needs to be re-educated by the Republic, separated from his mother's corrupting monarchist influence. Marie-Thérèse later documented this moment in her personal memoir. She described watching her mother transform instantaneously, from composed to absolutely primal. Marie Antoinette throws herself between the guards and her sleeping child. She snatches Louis Charles into her arms, gripping him so fiercely that he wakes up crying and confused, and then she starts screaming. Not with the controlled objections of former royalty. These are raw, guttural, animal screams of a mother protecting her offspring. "You cannot take him. You'll have to kill me first. He's just a child." The guards attempt to reason with her. The order comes from the highest authority in France. She has no legal choice. Compliance is not optional. She doesn't care about their orders. She doesn't care about their authority. For 1 full hour, 60 solid minutes, she physically blocks that doorway, clutching her son, refusing to surrender him. The guards escalate their threats. They threaten her. They threaten the boy. They threaten her daughter. They warn her that if she continues resisting, they'll use force and people will get seriously hurt. Marie Antoinette keeps fighting. Finally, Madame Elisabeth intervenes, begging her sister-in-law to stop. The boy is sobbing, absolutely terrified. Marie-Thérèse has become hysterical. The guards are growing increasingly violent. Something terrible is about to happen. Marie Antoinette's resistance collapses. She pulls Louis Charles close one final time. She kisses his face. She whispers something directly into his ear. Whatever she said remains unknown to history. Then she watches helplessly as 6 grown men physically drag her 8-year-old son down those tower stairs, his screams echoing through the corridors until they fade into nothing. She collapses onto the floor and remains motionless for hours afterward. But here's where this story becomes truly monstrous. The revolutionaries didn't simply take her son away. They placed him under the control of a man named Antoine Simon, a radical cobbler specifically selected to deroyalize the child. Simon's methods were absolutely brutal. Louis Charles was locked inside a dark room with no windows. He was forced to wear the red cap of the revolution and sing anti-monarchist songs. He was systematically taught to curse his mother, to call her horrible names, to repeat accusations of treason and conspiracy against her. When he refused or resisted, Simon beat him, starved him, kept him in isolation until the child's will was completely broken. Within just a few weeks, Louis Charles was mechanically repeating everything they programmed him to say, including accusations so vile, so monstrous, that they would eventually be used as weapons against his mother in the most horrifying way imaginable. Marie Antoinette didn't know the specific details, but she knew her son was suffering somewhere, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to save him. That's when they transferred her to the conciergerie, August 1st, 1793. Less than 1 month after they ripped her son from her arms, guards burst into Marie Antoinette's prison room at 2 o'clock in the morning. No explanation provided, no advance warning, just a simple command. You're being moved to a different location. They separated her from her daughter and sister-in-law without ceremony. She begged them to allow her to say goodbye. They refused. They dragged her down the tower stairs, threw her into a waiting carriage, and transported her through the dark streets of Paris to a place called the conciergerie. If you know anything about the French Revolution, that name should send chills down your spine. The conciergerie was known by a specific nickname, the antechamber to the guillotine. It's where condemned prisoners spent their final days before execution. Marie Antoinette wasn't just being relocated. She was being prepared for death, and the revolutionaries intended to make those final days as psychologically devastating as humanly possible. She was assigned the number 280. Not former Queen of France, not even her own name, just a number, reducing her to less than human. Her cell measured roughly 12 feet by 8 feet, a tiny box of suffering. The walls were damp stone covered with mold. Inside was a thin straw mattress that provided almost no comfort, a simple wooden table, 2 chairs, and a chamber pot. A single candle provided the only light. No windows existed, just suffocating darkness pressing in from medieval dungeon walls. And here's the truly insidious detail. They provided her with a privacy screen, a folding screen she could use when changing clothes or using the chamber pot. Sounds almost humane, doesn't it? It wasn't. The privacy screen was pure theater, because inside that tiny cell, at every moment of every day and night, sat 2 armed guards. They positioned themselves in the corner and watched her constantly, every single second, when she ate her meager food, when she tried to sleep, when she changed her clothes behind that useless screen, when she used the chamber pot, when she prayed quietly, when she broke down crying. Constant, unblinking surveillance. This wasn't about security. She was a middle-aged woman in rapidly failing health, locked inside a dungeon with no possible escape. This was pure psychological torture, methodically designed to strip away her final shred of dignity and privacy. Historical records describe how Marie Antoinette struggled to maintain her composure under these conditions. She would sit for hours staring at the moldy wall, her face deliberately blank and expressionless. The guards reported that she rarely spoke, rarely moved, and barely touched her food. But when night came, when she believed the flickering candlelight obscured her face, they heard her crying softly, whispering her son's name over and over like a prayer. Louis Charles, again and again. She developed severe hemorrhaging, possibly from uterine cancer or complications from extreme stress. She bled through her clothing and was forced to ask the guards for rags, enduring this humiliation in front of men who stared at her without a trace of mercy. Her hair, now completely white, began falling out in clumps. She was 37 years old. She looked 60. And then came the trial. October 14th, 1793, 8 o'clock in the morning. Marie Antoinette was dragged from her cell to face the Revolutionary Tribunal. Calling it a trial is generous. This was political theater. The verdict had been decided before she ever entered the room, but the revolutionaries needed to stage a public spectacle, something to justify her execution to the people and to future historians. The courtroom was absolutely packed. Revolutionary officials, journalists, ordinary citizens eager to witness the humiliation of their former queen. The prosecutor, a ruthless man named Antoine Fouquier-Tinville, had prepared an extensive list of charges: treason, conspiracy with foreign powers, financial corruption that bankrupted France. Marie Antoinette sat in the defendant's chair, looking pale and gaunt, dressed entirely in black widow's clothing. For 2 solid days, they hurled accusations at her, that she conspired with Austria against French interests, that she squandered the national treasury on her personal luxuries, that she plotted counter-revolutionary schemes to restore the monarchy. She responded to each charge with surprising composure and intelligence. She calmly refuted claims that were demonstrably false. She acknowledged genuine mistakes without groveling or begging. She refused to be broken by their verbal assault. So Fouquier-Tinville decided to play his final, most venomous card. He called a witness to the stand Jacques Hébert, a radical journalist known for his extreme views. Hébert repeated accusations that allegedly came from Marie Antoinette's own 8-year-old son, Louis Charles. The child, under intense coaching and pressure from his captors, had supposedly claimed that his mother committed incest with him. Let that accusation settle in your mind for a moment. They accused her of sexually abusing her own child, using testimony that had been tortured out of an 8-year-old boy, spoken aloud in a public courtroom packed with hundreds of people. The room fell into shocked silence. Even the bloodthirsty revolutionary mob seemed momentarily stunned by the sheer depravity of the accusation. Marie Antoinette had remained stoic through every insult, every lie, every threat thrown at her during the trial. But this accusation, this one shattered her carefully maintained composure. She rose to her feet, her voice, which had been calm and controlled, now cracking with raw emotion. "I appeal to all the mothers present in this courtroom," she said, her eyes blazing with intensity. "Is there among you a single one who would not recoil at such an accusation?" She didn't address the judges or the prosecutors. She spoke directly to the women scattered throughout the crowd, mothers, daughters, sisters. For the first time during the entire trial, she wasn't defending herself as a former queen. She was speaking as a mother whose own child had been weaponized against her in the cruelest way imaginable. Nature itself refuses to answer such a charge made against a mother. She continued, her voice shaking. "I appeal to every mother who can hear my voice." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Some women in the crowd, who had arrived that morning eager to jeer at her execution, found themselves moved to tears. Even some of the hardened revolutionary officials shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The accusation was too much, too cruel, too obviously wrong. Oui, but Fouquier-Tinville didn't care about justice or truth. He steamrolled forward through the rest of the proceedings. At 4 o'clock in the morning, on October 16th, after a trial lasting less than 48 hours, with no credible evidence presented, Marie Antoinette was found guilty of high treason and crimes against the French state. The sentence was death by guillotine. Execution scheduled for later that same day. She was given just a few hours back in her cell to prepare herself for death. In those final hours before dawn, with death now just hours away, Marie Antoinette was finally given pen, paper, and ink. She didn't write a political statement. She didn't curse the revolution. She didn't beg anyone for mercy. She wrote a letter to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, who remained imprisoned in the temple with Marie Antoinette's daughter. That letter stands as one of the most heartbreaking documents in all of history. Let me share portions of it with you. It is to you, sister, that I write for the last time. I have just been condemned, not to a shameful death, for such is only for criminals, but to go and rejoin your brother. Innocent like him, I hope to demonstrate the same firmness in these final moments. I am calm as one is when one's conscience holds no reproach. I deeply regret having to abandon my poor children. You know that I existed only for them and for you, my good and tender sister. She continued, forgiving her enemies, asking forgiveness for any wrongs she might have committed, and begging her sister-in-law to care for her children after she was gone. May my son never forget his father's last words, which I deliberately repeat to him. Let him never seek to avenge our deaths. She poured every ounce of her remaining love and humanity onto those pages. Her final thoughts as a mother, as a sister, as a human being facing the absolute void. The letter filled 4 pages. She signed it simply, Marie Antoinette. Then she handed it to a guard. Here's the devastating truth that makes this moment even more tragic. The letter was never delivered. Her jailers intercepted it immediately. It disappeared into a revolutionary archive. Madame Elizabeth never read those final words. Neither did her daughter. The letter wasn't discovered and made public until decades later, long after everyone Marie Antoinette loved was already dead. Her final message to her family died in complete silence. October 16, 1793, 11 o'clock in the morning. The executioner's assistant entered Marie Antoinette's cell with orders for her to prepare. Every single step of what followed was deliberately designed to strip away the final remnants of her identity as a human being. First, her clothing. She was wearing a simple black mourning gown she'd worn since her husband's death. The guard ordered her to remove it and put on a plain white chemise, the standard uniform of the condemned. She asked if she could change in private. The guard refused outright. She had to undress in front of the men who'd been watching her for months. Second, her hair. What remained of her hair, now completely white and brittle, was crudely hacked off with dull shears. No ceremony, no care or gentleness, just rough hands and sharp blades cutting away one of her last remaining physical dignities. Third, the binding. Her hands were tied tightly behind her back with coarse rope, so tight that it cut painfully into her wrists. She flinched visibly and said quietly, "You did not bind my husband's hands this way." The guard ignored her completely. At 11 o'clock she was led out of the conciergerie into blinding daylight. She'd been trapped in that dark cell for 76 days straight. The sudden sunlight hurt her eyes. She'd expected a closed carriage, the small mercy that had been granted to her husband. Instead, waiting for her was a rough open wooden cart called a tumbril, the type typically used to transport animal carcasses to market. She was forced to climb into the cart and sit on a rough wooden plank, hands bound behind her, completely exposed to the entire city of Paris. As the cart lurched forward and began rolling through the streets, thousands upon thousands of people lined the route, screaming, jeering, spitting, throwing garbage and refuse at her. One man sat positioned at a window along the route, sketching furiously as she passed. His name was Jacques Louis David, the revolutionary artist who had actually voted for her death. His drawing still exists today. It shows a thin, hollow-eyed woman sitting rigidly upright in that cart, her face frozen in a mask of grim dignity, as the entire world howled for her blood. The journey from the conciergerie to the Place de la Révolution took over an hour. A full hour of public humiliation, deliberately designed to destroy whatever remained of her spirit. It didn't work. At 12:15 in the afternoon, The cart finally stopped at the base of the guillotine. The massive crowd roared with bloodlust. Marie Antoinette climbed the steps of the scaffold without any assistance, her legs visibly shaking but her head held deliberately high. And then, in the very final moment of her life, something extraordinary and strange happened. As she walked toward the wooden plank where she would be positioned, she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. She immediately stopped, turned to face him, and spoke her last words. "Pardon me, sir. I did not mean to do it." An apology to the man who was about to kill her. A bizarre, almost surreal act of courtesy in that moment. The final reflex of a lifetime lived under strict royal protocol. But it was more than just habit. It was a choice. In the face of absolute degradation and dehumanization, she chose to hold on to her grace. 20 seconds later, the blade fell. The crowd cheered. The French Revolution wanted to destroy Marie Antoinette, the symbol, the Austrian woman, the wasteful queen, the living embodiment of royal excess and corruption. They subjected her to unimaginable psychological torture. They weaponized her own child against her. They stripped her of every dignity, every comfort, every microscopic shred of privacy and humanity. And in the end, they failed at what they really wanted. Because in their obsession with breaking the queen, they accidentally revealed the human being underneath all those layers. A mother who fought desperately for her children against impossible odds. A woman who faced monstrous accusations with courage and dignity. A person who, even standing on the steps of the guillotine with death, seconds away held onto her fundamental humanity. They wanted her remembered as the widow Capet, a traitor who deserved everything that happened to her. Instead, history remembers Marie Antoinette, a flawed human being who endured 76 days of calculated cruelty and still found the grace to apologize to her executioner in her final breath. That's the part they couldn't take from her, no matter how hard they tried. If this story affected you, make sure to subscribe to this channel. We explore history's darkest and most compelling chapters every single week, and leave a comment below. Now that you know what really happened during those final 76 days, how do you see Marie Antoinette? Was she a villain, a victim, or was she something far more complicated and human than either of those labels can capture?